Okay, so thank you. So next up, I would like to welcome Sarad Davenport, Charles Lewis, and Angilee Shah to the stage. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to discuss the evolution of the Charlottesville Inclusive Media Project. And we're running just a few minutes behind, but take your time. We're going to figure this out. So no worries about time's not going to get cut off. So come on and have a seat.
All right, good morning. Good morning. Okay, just want to make sure this thing is on. Well, as a man thinketh, so is he. So that's why the work that everybody here does is so important in my purview. So can we give ourselves a hand? Everybody give yourselves a hand. And also want to give a special thanks to Stephanie and Denise as well, putting together a fine program. And so Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a rich, complex history, like most cities, like a lot of cities. But then there was 2017. There was August 12th, AKA A12, AKA the Summer of Hate. And it really magnified the misrepresentation in our area, right? So that also amplified the need for the change of the ecosystem, which spawned Charlottesville Inclusive Media Project. And so that Charlottesville Inclusive Media Project are the good folks that you see here. And on the screen there, oh, you got me, Angilee? All right, and on the screen there, so Charlottesville Tomorrow, nonprofit public service news organization, where Angilee Shah is the CEO and editor-in-chief. Also, Vinegar Hill magazine, which is an independent African-American publishing company, which Sarad Davenport is the chief of operations. And then it's also the In My Humble Opinion talk show, where yours truly is producer / engineer and co-host. So from there, Sarad, I'm going to kick it over to Sarad to kind of show you all what the first steps of our project were.
Thank you, Charles, and thanks, everybody. And I think everybody at this point, and Charles did the AKAs, but understand that, Charlottesville had a pretty critical inflection point in 2017, but the actual ambition to have a more inclusive social narrative has been something that Charlottesville has been desiring to have for much longer than that. It's been something that has been needed. And so, this collaborative approach came together it wasn't very organized, I would say, at first. There was a lot of skepticism at the beginning because, we were a black media organization, and then we were approached by what you would call, what we're calling legacy media organizations, and they were thinking about ways to collaborate. And for several years, we were like, this is just going to be another status quo type of collaboration that is filled with some type of paternalism and a way to, get engagement with our particular audience without any kind of equal participation or equal standing in the relationship. So there were lots of discussions, particularly between Vinegar Hill and Charlottesville Tomorrow, about how we can make this real, right? And whereas there would be equal standing among the black media organizations and the legacy media organizations that would potentially be a part of this collaborative. And there were some tough discussions at the beginning because of this the skepticism. I had a background in nonprofit collaboration at, the local to the national level. So I knew, some of the games that are played along the way. And I was like, well, we can continue doing what we're doing if we're going to go into something that is status quo. So we decided to really do something different and to really have an approach that was authentically collaborative, and whereas we respected the value that everybody and the currency transparency that every publication brought to the partnerships, understanding that, Charlottesville Tomorrow may have more financial resources, may have more back office, but that doesn't discount the value and the currency that, the black publication of record in Charlottesville, Virginia brings to the table. And how do we make sure that we're leveraging the currency of each organization and valuing it such that there isn't a hierarchy in the relationship. So that was a big thing that we had to work through in the beginning. Branding was a big thing that we worked on to make sure that we were conceptualized in the right way and that it was real. We started out with a series during 2020. During that time, early 2020, COVID hit, and also there was an uprising in America, and we created this series called the Determined series, and Determined was based on the social determinants of health, which we thought at Vinegar Health Magazine was an approach to address all of these concerns, like the health concerns with regards to the black community, and also the uprising, which we believe was rooted a lot in health, if you look at the social determinants of health. So we did that series. We were able to get some funding, some support from and others. IMHO Radio came on board. There was transformation at Charlottesville Tomorrow's board where they became more diverse as an operation. I'm sure Angilee will talk a little bit more about that. We created, a show called Black Truths, White Truths as a part of this collaboration. And we also began this direction around this concept called First Person Charlottesville, and I'll turn it over to Angilee to kind of take us through that phase.
Yeah, and I can't appreciate enough how much this partnership has been important to Charlottesville Tomorrow itself. It began before I got there, but was so hard won. I mean, people in Charlottesville did not trust each other. It was segregated in the media, as well as in the built environment. And, when I came to Charlottesville, you couldn't go to people and expect them to be like, oh yeah, this is a great idea to talk to a journalist. It was not a good idea for most people because they had been burned so many times, and they have local media that does things like run police press releases and mugshots, and national media that shows up in times of crisis, unfortunately, of which we've had many over the last 5 years. So, how do you rebuild trust in a community? That was the problem we were trying to solve, and it started with rebuilding trust between our organizations, or building trust that was never there, frankly. And that, we had to, our board was extremely courageous and rolled over almost completely. We have an almost completely new board since 2017. It became more diverse, it became more community representative, and it became more dedicated to growing a broader ecosystem that it could include more people in news media. So our most recent project that Charles and Sarad and I dreamed up when I became editor-in-chief of Charlottesville Tomorrow is called First Person Charlottesville. And this is a very durable, ongoing project that we've worked on for just over a year now. Because one thing we saw in the local ecosystem, there are so few journalists in Central Virginia. I can count them on my hands, the number of independent journalists in our region. And two, that means we don't have people who are thinking about media as a career if they are from that place and dedicated to that place. So we needed ways to get more people involved in the work of journalism, to get people involved in the work of telling the stories of Central Virginia. So our first sort of way into that was First Person Charlottesville, which is a really simple idea in a lot of ways, but getting people who are very close to the issues that all three of our organizations cover to tell their own stories about what it is like to live through those issues, their testimonies, with reported material in it. So it involves both professionalizing the work. I think marginalized people in Charlottesville get asked to tell their stories all the time, but UVA researchers are everywhere, journalists everywhere, the Washington Post comes around every month or so. I mean, people are always asking, particularly black people in Charlottesville, to tell their stories, to tell their traumas. And we wanted to build a space where we could help people tell their own stories the way they wanted to, pay them properly for it, pay them competitively for that work, and give it the professional treatment it deserves so that it comes out the way that they see reality is. And so that those narratives become core to the conversations we have in the city and our surrounding counties. So we're really excited about First Person Charlottesville. We're really excited about the impact that we can have locally in terms of shifting who has power in our news media. So just a little bit about that impact, though. This was one of the first stories that we ran, a really rare narrative that took a long time to develop trust. And from what we can tell from records, the first black woman detective in the Charlottesville PD wrote about what it was like to be an officer protecting the KKK when they rallied in 2017. And for her to tell that story took a lot of guts, because her struggle was really taking it from all sides. People were very angry with the police, and they were all obviously very angry with white supremacists. And so, her ability to tell that story was really powerful, and the feedback we got, the feedback we continue to get from people who are looking at their relationships with the police, with community members differently because she told that story has been really amazing. So we see that through a lot of the different types of stories that we tell.
Yeah. So, building off of that, the whole first person Charlottesville essay model, we had to figure out a way as well to once again maximize the resource of all of our entities, and so the podcast idea came about. And so our podcast channel is named after our show, In My Humble Opinion. So you all please subscribe. And so that is, again, that's another way to share the stories, and the trust that you've heard mentioned multiple times cannot be overstated, right? For people that have been underrepresented and misrepresented, there's a level of trust that has to be built first. Like, it can't just be, hey, I want to write better stories about your life and think they're just gonna be transparent. So it's definitely a community building, and I like to call it the domino effect. I feel like the three individuals and entities that's on the stage in front of you right now, we had to set the example. Right, 3 boards, organizations, diverse, very different from each other, had to set the example that, hey, we can work together and cause positive change. So saying all that, I can't think of a better example that we have out of all of our podcast episodes of First Person Charlottesville than Miss India Sims that you see there on the screen. India has been wheelchair bound since she was an infant. And so she is someone that has been jaded by her reality of underrepresentation and feeling like that nobody's listening and nobody really cares. It's a prime example of how people in our community believe in our work and our platform. So here's a little clip. Here, it's the audiogram of the podcast of India's episode. So do we play it here or back there?
I think Joe can help us with this. Yeah.
With my business, I gotta prove to people that I can do it. With my home, I gotta prove to this, that I got this and I got that. It doesn't matter if you have good credit. It doesn't matter if you have a deposit. It's so much. And Charlottesville, I'm gonna say it, Charlottesville put this big persona that they love everybody and they accept everybody and they'll do whatever they want for everybody. I'm here. Start on me. Start on someone that actually wants it and will work for it. Because I know what it's like to be thrown away. I was thrown away after the doctors paralyzed me. So if anybody knows how to salvage and put things together and hold it in place, that's me.
You can clap. Yeah, so, another thing that, I want to just lift up, Angelee's predecessor at a recent conference, he also said, Giles Morris, he said that, we're really also in this is a healing project. And all of us have decided to come together because we want to be intentional about, healing our community. And we're using media as a way to be the healers of our community. So a little bit about participation. Like Angilee said, we've been going on for about a year. I don't know if I've conceptualized it, but I've been using it on the road here, and I'm calling it multimodal. So, we use a multimodal approach in which you'll see the audiograms. We even had first person that was photography only, because we want people to be able to come into the space of first person Charlottesville in a multimodal way, and that may be non-traditional in the ways that we think about journalism and how people still tell stories in community. So you'll see there have been story pitches, written stories, podcast episodes, what we're calling photo essays that I talked about, events and panels. We've received some grants along the way that have been helpful to the infrastructure of the project. And a little bit about that piece is that Charlottesville Tomorrow has back office, has more infrastructure, but a lot of the emphasis of this collaboration has been on building the Black media organizations and helping them get the back office infrastructure, the capacity that they need to be able to do the great work that they can. Because that's often left out of the conversation. It's not that they can't do work, they don't necessarily have the resources to accomplish at the highest levels, and we've been able to do that through some of the resources we received. And our community members are chiming in. I mean, we've been if anybody knows anything about Charlottesville, there's a lot of philanthropy that goes on there. I think that we have more nonprofits per capita than New York City. So a lot of people are giving, and there's a big competition, but there have been some folks in the community who have seen the work that we are doing and believe in it, and we've been surprised by how people have supported it, and we continue to work on the product so that we can continue to have that type of engagement. And the objective is for us to start, we thought about all right, do we wait till we get something big? But we made the decision to start and then scale, and to produce an MVP, so to speak. What's the minimum viable product, and let's put that together and demonstrate some success. And we've been able to see kind of growth over time by not waiting. And really with the intention to be a healer in the community, we couldn't wait. We couldn't wait because, things were continuing to, and we can see it across our country. I'm always championing the fourth estate and how we have to kind of step up and be more accountable, and we see our role in, having a more inclusive social narrative is a part of that work, and we have to, kind of step up and be accountable in these times. So, with that said, I'll turn it over to Angilee to talk about kind of where we're going.
So I think a really important thing about our work together as partners is that we do this for the ecosystem. Central Virginia needs journalism, and it needs a plurality of journalism. It needs different kinds of journalism, different types of voices, different perspectives. It doesn't just need traditional daily newspaper journalism. It needs traditional Black journalism. It needs we don't have a Spanish language news outlet in Central Virginia. We need more from indigenous people, Monacan Nation in our area, that isn't for the purpose of serving just Black communities or just Latino communities or just immigrant communities or just indigenous communities. We need folks in different communities to own the narrative for everybody. And so our collaborative, yes, we're running First Person Charlottesville right now, and it's at our organizations to do it. We are paying people for the work, and that's where a lot of our budget goes. But really the goal of Charlottesville Inclusive Media is to change the ecosystem where we are. to say, okay, people are beginning to have an interest in local news, finally. You know, we're at a point where people can't ignore the lack of local news where we are. How are we going to rebuild it? What is that going to look like? Is it going to look like it did 50 years ago? Because if that's the case, all three of us here on the stage have a problem. Because that type of media didn't serve our communities well enough. It didn't include our communities well enough. So our project is really about lifting people in our communities who are doing the work to keep people informed, to connect people, and saying, can we build our ecosystem from that position of strength? So as you can see, the sky's the limit. I mean, Central Virginia needs resources, and different communities need resources to tell their stories. So we're building toward that.
I think it's back on me. So I've been coming up with, I have all of these concepts. If you need a lexicon for anything you're doing, just talk to me. We'll work it out. But, you know, ripple effects. And I think that anecdotally we've seen how our ability to be nimble and innovative has affected, you know, the small ecosystem that we have in the Charlottesville region, and just between like our artistic approach. I think all of us are artistic in our own way. I certainly am, you know, artistically inclined and tech adjacent, and we try to bring all of those things to bear to the work that we do. And we've seen other media publications and to respond to what we've been able to do, and to also change their coverage, the way they cover, and we think that's positive, right? Some people may be upset, like if people make those shifts, but if we really want a more inclusive social narrative, and we're causing these ripple effects throughout the ecosystem, then we see that as positive. At least I do. And it also, we're able to amplify folks, because we can mine for, I got another one, mine for genius. This probably isn't my concept, but mining for genius in the community and really putting people in a place where they can be amplified, where there may be other publications that have broader or bigger audiences, and we want to be the first to find them. We want to be the first to find those stories, and that's okay. And if it changes the media coverage of other organizations because of our approach and our ability to be innovative and move quickly to things, then we think it's all for the better, and better for the quality of the community. So with that said, I think we have some time for a few questions, if there are some.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a lovely presentation. So for some context, one of the things I do in Philadelphia is work with the Center for Better Gun Violence Reporting, which helps pairs gun violence survivors or co-survivors with reporters to work on closely reported or credible messenger reporting projects. And that sounded awfully similar to a lot of the work you're doing in this collaborative with closely reported stories, and empowering regular community members to do journalistic work. But what I noticed from talking with the mentors and the editors in our processes is that it's hard to modulate expectations, because these people come from a background where they, because we're not the best at explaining our work, don't understand how to do our jobs in the way they conceive of them, or the final product they're putting out is not necessarily their words so much, or like their words or their works, because an editor is taking over to shape it into something that like is publishable. So I was kind of curious, like how you manage those relationships, and like the types of training you provide, and kind of how you balance giving people agency over their work and empowering their voice with also producing a quality product that matches an audience's expectation of like information.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that our product probably does not match our audience's expectations of what journalism looks like. We are teaching them to have new expectations about the kinds of journalism that matter. And I will say, it's challenging, and it takes time. So, when we have a new contributor, we spend a lot of time talking with them about what the process is and what they can expect. And that we pay them because we expect to go through multiple edits, because when Charles does an interview, I definitely recommend listening to the podcast because a lot of these questions are answered in just Charles's style of interviewing and the way he both challenges and gives agency to people. And we have this beautiful producer who does beautiful non-narrated work as well to really draw that out. So for India's story, for example, I think that piece, so she wrote first.
Okay.
And I think that piece maybe took 3 months to work through. We went through 4 drafts, and mostly I sat with her and did it. So by the time she got to the podcast, she understood her narrative, her own narrative. It was working through, she has so many things to say, and a lot of it's like, all right, let's choose 1 or 2 things you want to focus on here. But it really is about being a great editor and being a great teacher and being patient and understanding your job is to make their story powerful, not to tell their story in the way that you want it told. We explain fact-checking a lot up front. And say, okay, if you want to tell this part of your story, we're going to have to go back to the court record or go back to the person who did you wrong and talk to them. And sometimes they're like, okay, let's leave that part of the story out because I'm not ready to do that kind of work. And they can make that choice, understanding the process.
Yeah, and one thing that I would add to it is that, like, that's the sort of shining example of the importance of our collaborative media, is that, like, we may, one of us may get presented with someone who has a story, but we may determine, hey, like, this may be a better radio interview, or we, may want to send a journalist out or, a reporter out, to go visit whatever the instance or situation is. So that, like, that highlights why, collaborating and having sort of options for people's comfort zones is so important.
I'm going to try to do this real quickly. Is that also, I think Angilee hinted to it about preparing the audience. And there's a concept called demonstration of mastery. And how the expectation that people need to present in a certain way that is acceptable to others is part of what we're trying to attack also. Like, people that come from different cultures, like, their way is not acceptable. When they have shown demonstration of mastery, maybe you need to shift and understand that there may be differentiation in presentation and stop expecting a status quo presentation that fits into a certain box. And there are different modalities by which information can come across. So preparing the audience for that also is important.
That's really helpful because our project does do podcasts, does do personal essays, does do reported work in photos. But the other question I wanted to ask, if nobody has another one, or go do a quick one,
What person behind you, if you want to?
first then.
Maybe.
No. Oh my God. This is super quick. How do you kind of set expectations in the fact-checking process? What I've heard from some of our partners is that it's always like, why are you asking me for proof? Why do I have to keep explaining myself? I explain myself to all these other systems, and they get really frustrated, and sometimes they quit because that's asking for fact-checking is like, it seems like you don't believe somebody.
It's hard.
Right? So how do you set that?
I remember the ICIJ editors called it a colonoscopy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah. So how do you work through that and kind of acknowledge their frustrations, but also like level set with them?
It's really important to start that conversation before there's any words on paper,
Okay.
because, I think intentions matter. And if it's really clear that we have this partnership and our intention is to make their story as strong as possible, and also to set the intention with them. What is it that you want this story to do? What do you want community members to hear? Okay, we're going to bring our expertise to help you do that. So when we ask you a question, it's because we know that you want a community member who doesn't understand your neighborhood or doesn't understand what it means to have brick cobblestone everywhere to somebody in a wheelchair. You want them to understand that. So we're going to have to make sure you don't have those bumps in your piece that are going to turn certain people off because they don't believe you. So it's all about intention setting. Our intention is not to question you. Our intention is to help you reach your goal with the story that you want to tell.
Yeah, of course, we're in a, I'm sorry, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. And real quick, I just wanted to add too, I know we're a smaller town than Philly, but like the relationship building is key, like the timing.
They know us by the time we get to this
and then a lot of it is just, they may not be ready, but they want to know you care. Literally, like, they want to know you're not doing this just for a job. You actually care about their story. And so I've had people that may have to come back at a later date when they were ready.
I just had a really quick question about how you differentiate between sources and then journalists, and then how do you go about paying people? Like, what does that process look like when you decide, oh, someone is just telling me their story to like publish, versus that they're the journalists and now they must be paid? And where do you get the money to pay these storytellers?
Yeah. So we live in a small town, right? Everybody has conflicts of interest always. There's just no, like I said, I can count the number of independent journalists on my hand, right? So, everybody's been paid by UVA for something at some point. Everybody has a conflict of interest for something. So our sort of way of dealing with that is just being completely transparent. If we say, we have this like very strict, I was in public media, I understand. If we made very strict rules, we would literally have nobody to work with. So yeah, we have people who have been sources and stories who we also pay to do first person. And we just pay them. There's not, I want to say some complicated answer. If they do work and tell a story, we just pay them. They send us an invoice and we send them money. It's not super complicated in that way. And for us, it's very practical. There's a lot about journalism that has a lot of rules, but those rules are made for national media outlets or communities where you're playing into the power structure of the existing power structure. And we make rules to play into what we want for the community or what the community wants from us.